Whenever you mention the words fighting game, one name stands above them all. The master, the granddaddy of all fighting games. I am of course referring to Street Fighter. During Spunkface's run, I have covered a few of the Street Fighting games in the franchise, from Street Fighter 2, and Street Fighter 4, and spin-offs like X-Men vs Street Fighter. So it is only fitting that I add more onto that list. Now I'm yet to cover Street Fighter 3 and the recently released Street Fighter 6, so those are topics for future videos. The subject of today's video is of course Street Fighter 5, a game that has a very interesting rise to glory. Starting out as a game that was far from finished with a minuscule roster to an excellent fighting game that has become very popular with the online fighting game community, with, to date, the biggest roster in Street Fighter history. Following the success of its predecessor Street Fighter 4, an unofficial video was released on December the 5th, 2014 on YouTube. It was a video of Street Fighter 5, but then it was very quickly taken down. And then the following day, we got the official look from Capcom via PlayStation Experience in Las Vegas. The gameplay looked somewhat similar to Street Fighter 4, the graphics looked a little better. Given what we had just experienced with number 4, I was full on excited with the next installment of Street Fighter. However, my excitement would end up becoming a bit diluted over time due to the many hurdles that plagued Street Fighter 5 in its initial stages. Now, unlike 4, Street Fighter 5 was going to be a console exclusive to the PlayStation. Given a large chunk of my enjoyment of Street Fighter 4 came on the Xbox 360, this was something of a letdown. Even though I was at a point in my life where I could just save and get both the 360 and the PlayStation 3, and I did, it was still disappointing to have the game tied up to just one console. Now, it would be a full 14 months before we got the eagerly anticipated release of the game. And sure enough, the game got its full official release on PlayStation 4 on February 16th, 2016. Now, I did not buy it on its initial release. I had read online complaints about how the roster size had just shrunk to 16 characters, and given what I had just experienced from Street Fighter 4, this was a massive letdown. There had been complaints about the gameplay not being as smooth, and certain character designs were ridiculed by fans, like Ken for example, with his new blonde man bun. The roster included 4 newbies in its initial lineup: Nikali, Laura, Rashid, and Fang. The latter of which has gone on to become one of the most hated characters in the game's history. I can say that I'm simply not a fan of that character, except for when I choose him as a punching bag when I go one-on-one with the CPU. Given Street Fighter's rich history, even up until that point, the roster size and the selection was extremely underwhelming and questionable. The game also had a distinct lack of modes, including a basic arcade mode, which was just a big head scratcher. The game was preparing for a full-on cinematic mode entitled A Shadow Falls, which did not get released until July 1st, 2016. So with all of these going against the game, for the first time ever I was not rushing to get a Street Fighter game. I just went back to playing Street Fighter 4. Now I do remember seeing on eBay a copy of Street Fighter 5 for around 10 to 15 bucks, and I thought, why not? I was fine initially with the gameplay, but I was still very disappointed with the roster size. I was a huge fan of the focus attacks in Street Fighter 4, but that was gone, and here it was replaced with the V-trigger attacks, a feature that to this day I am not the biggest fan of. I will gladly take the focus attacks every day of the week, but then that's just me. But the lack of the features I mentioned earlier really began to get me down on the game. But fortunately I had bought the game around May 2016, so I didn't have long to wait for the Shadow Falls story, and this is when I began to take a real liking to the game. I remember playing the mode and going through the story over the course of 2 days, and not even switching off my PlayStation 4. I got hooked on the story, and even though it is not widely regarded by a lot of fans of what many would consider an amazing story, for me it was just interesting enough to keep on playing and see how the story unfolded. The game is set between the events of Street Fighter 2 and Street Fighter 3, so seeing how the game ends, it made some sense as to why we have both Gil and Bison in the game. Now personally in Street Fighter canon, I would have worked it so this would have been the latest entry in the timeline, besides having it take place between Street Fighters 2 and Street Fighters 4. That was always something of a confusing head scratcher to me. Also around that point, Capcom started releasing their annual season DLC updates, introducing new characters. The Season 1 and the Season 2 DLC packs I had largely stayed away from because of the pricing. After what I'd seen NetherRealm do with Injustice 2, offering an affordable one-time DLC purchase, I was not at all keen on purchasing DLC season after season at the prices that were on offer. It was just too much, and quite frankly it's a shady business practice from Capcom, as tons of fans all over the world were quick to point out, and rightfully so. On October 5th, 2017, Capcom released Street Fighter V Arcade Edition, which, if you owned a copy of Street Fighter V, was a free update, which was a huge bonus in my book, especially as it contained all the DLC characters from Seasons 1 and 2, increasing my choice in characters. There was also new interface graphics, 2 brand new gameplay modes, Arcade Extra and Extra Battle, which quite frankly should have been added in the game's original release, but what have you there, 1 additional V-trigger per character, and a new CG cinematic opening. All in all, it gave Street Fighter V a lot more life and made it feel like a much more attractive game to play now. It still feels short of 4, but finally it was beginning to feel like a complete game, and quite frankly, they should have just released it on this very date with all these updates, because it just goes back to showing that Street Fighter V, when it was first released, was not finished and it was rushed out and got a lot of deserved criticism. As we all know with Capcom, when it comes to Street Fighter games, they just have to release updated versions of the same game. These updates of course would include new characters, tweaked gameplay and new fighting stages. And on February 14th, 2020, wait a minute, 2020? Something happened that year. Anyway, February 14th, 2020, Capcom released the latest version update of this game, Street Fighter V Champion Edition. This version had several gameplay and balance changes, as well as each character getting a second V-skill. It also included every stage that had been added up until that point. Almost 4 years since the game's release, and it finally began to feel like a fighting game worthy of the Street Fighter fame and history. Now I move on to the section that I enjoy most about fighting games, which is the roster selection. As I stated earlier in the video, the game started off with just 16 characters. With Season 1 and Season 2 DLC packs, a further 12 joined the fray and gave a total of 28 characters. Now the game was really beginning to take some shape. I must say though, of the DLC 1 and 2 packs, I was only interested in a handful of them. Season 1 saw Alex, Balrog, Guile, Ibuki, Juri, and Urien join the fray. And Guile and Ibuki are the only ones that I play a lot from this selection. Juri and Alex to a lesser extent, as they do have some fancy moves. I was never the biggest Balrog fan, and Urien is largely a CPU opponent for me. The Season 2 DLC pack saw the arrivals of Abigail, Akuma, Ed, Colleen, Menat, and Zeku. An even more underwhelming bunch, with only Akuma the one I really use from here. Everyone else made for excellent CPU opponents. Capcom released a total of 5 annual DLC packs. It was originally going to be 6, but then it was kept to 5. Now the choices range from cool to meh. Just to finish off the character packs, there is Season 3, which included Blanca, Cody, Falca, G, Sagat, Sakura. My favourite of the DLC packs, as everyone here I enjoyed playing. Everyone except for G. He's an interesting, mysterious character claiming to be president of the world. I just never got quite the hang of him. Falco is quite frankly a character I have little to zero interest in. Season 4 DLC brought to the fray E Honda, Gil, Kage, Lucia, Poison, and Seth. Now getting to play as 2 ex-Street Fighter bosses was always a welcome feature, and I do like Gil's moveset and his style. Seth is completely different from his Street Fighter 4 outing in his moveset and his appearance.
This version of Seth is true perfection!
I'm going to leave that right there. Kage is this game's version of Evil Ryu, but he plays well below that standard. with his rather mid moveset. He is someone I looked at as a character that they could have done so much more with, and he's quite frankly a little bit of a letdown. And finally, the 5th DLC pack saw Akira, Dan, 11, Luke, Oro, and Rose complete the roster. 11 is just basically the equivalent of selecting a random character, as he or it just transforms into another character from the roster and he has all their movesets. So personally, with no real special uniqueness about him, I felt his inclusion wasn't really necessary. Rose and Oro fall into the category of players that I'm least interested in, as I just leave them as difficult CPU opponents for me to fight with. Akira from Rival Schools is a decent player to use, and I love the end of battle quotes she has with both Sakura and Ibuki. Newcomer Luke I have taken to very well, as his moveset is identical to that of Ryu and Ken, which is always a winner in my book, and it makes him an instantly easy character to use. Luke is being seen as the future face of the Street Fighter franchise, and he is on the cover of Street Fighter 6, and is being touted as the next big star. A very useful character and a fun one to play as. We will see how the future develops with Luke. And finally, Dan Hibiki, a character that has always been seen as comic relief, but as his moveset is identical to both Ryu and Ken, he can be a very useful and devastating character to use, and quite frankly I find him a very big delight to play as. With all the DLC characters on display, it is very easy to forget about the initial starting lineup. Of that lineup are the regulars, Ryu, Ken, Chun-Li, Zangief, Dhalsim, Vega, and then Bison, which all represent the OG Street Fighter 2 lineup. Kevin comes in as the rep from Super Street Fighter 2. The Alpha series is also invaded with Nash, Kareen, Armika, and Birdie. I have already mentioned the newbies Rashid, Laura, Nikali, and Fang. Fang is rubbish as we've all established, so let's just quickly move on from him. Laura is okay, but again not amongst my favourites to play as. Nikali is weird. He's like G, I just don't know, save for what I've read online, what he's all about. A wild Aztec warrior who seeks strong opponents' souls. Everything about him is just off. And his feature in the storyline, he comes off as initially menacing, but he's quickly defeated by Ryu, and again, I just don't get him. I just don't. My favourite newcomer overall is Rashid, with his wind and mini hurricane attack moveset. He's very easy to get grips with, and he's one of my most played characters in the game. The overall lineup of Street Fighter V is something of a mixed bag. A number of the characters selected for this game I felt were inconsequential and a bit of a waste, if I'm being honest. Falca, G, Nikali, Ed, Colleen, and Menat are just a few of the characters that I did not particularly care for. I mean, I could have done with Fei Long, Adon, Dudley, Elena, and Goken taking their spots on the roster. And yes, I get it, you need to add new characters, but these lot, they just didn't do it for me. But then that's just my opinion. Now, whilst the roster did expand to a much bigger size and subsequently became the largest roster of Street Fighter characters assembled yet, I just feel that this selection was just simply not the best selection in my opinion. Another feature is the beautifully rendered stages in the game. Some are brand new to the Street Fighter franchise, and some are updated HD remakes of previous Street Fighter stages, like Ryu's Suzaku Castle and Kami's English Manor. The Capcom Pro Tournament saw the inclusion of 7 tournament exclusive stages, including Gil's Ring of Prosperity and Bison's Ring of Power. They all add a nice touch to the game and can be distracting, even with the colourful backgrounds and cameos from other Street Fighter characters. All in all, there are about 40 stages in total, which I believe is some kind of a record for Street Fighter games. Given its predecessor success, Street Fighter V started out as something of a disappointment. The small roster, the issues with online gameplay, but over time, with all the DLC additions, it has gone on to become a very successful fighting game, holding the record, as I've stated earlier, for the most Street Fighters to feature in a roster. It has become wildly popular with the online gaming community that it is a regularly featured game at EVO and other online fighting game tournaments. Despite my misgivings with the roster selection, it has really grown on me in recent years, and whilst it will always play second fiddle to Street Fighter 4, I can say that I am now a fan of Street Fighter V. So much so that I have actually found myself returning to playing it after I've recently purchased Street Fighter 6. Street Fighter 6 has started off with some of the same misgivings that I had about 5, so if history is anything to go by, Street Fighter 6 will get a slew of updates that will increase its playing value and become a very, very well respected fighting game. It's already gotten a lot of rave reviews online, and I will get back into playing it at some stage, and it is going to be a topic for a future video here on Smugface. So what started out as poor and underwhelming eventually ended up becoming fun and incredible. Street Fighter V adds to the already massive history of the Street Fighter series, and it has become a very worthy addition. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope you liked it, and if you want to see more, please remember to like, share and subscribe. Thank you.